statement to her mother-in-law. Do not press me to leave you, to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. John Ahn notes that there's a unique attribute to the Hebrew word to lodge in this text. He says it means to murmur or complain. This technical term is seen throughout the murmuring and complaining narratives of the Israelites living in the wilderness in Exodus. Thus, he says, we understand the lodging here to be a place of discomfort, laden with complaints or bitterness. In other words, Ruth knows full well that this choice she's making will not be easy. She knows that in choosing solidarity with Naomi, she's choosing hardship. She's making this choice with eyes wide open. But Naomi's question to Ruth and Orpah echoes back to me. Why will you go with me, she asks. And I have to admit that I wonder the same thing. Why would Ruth choose to go with Naomi, a woman so weighed down by grief that she will rename herself Mara, which means bitter? Why would Ruth choose a life of hardship, of marginalization and outsider status, of complaining and bitterness, over the real possibility of stability and happiness? You know, I think perhaps our culture conditions us to think like Naomi, to think that we need to go it alone. The messages that we receive, whether overt or implied, suggest that asking for help is weakness, that needing others is burdensome to them. Meanwhile, people who go it alone, who face challenges all by themselves, are celebrated as heroes. Over and over again, in big and small ways, we are told to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps. But I did some research about that phrase, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Did you know that it didn't originally have the meaning that we give it today? Etymologist Barry Popick and linguist Ben Zimmer found that the earliest published reference to pulling yourself up by your bootstraps in the United States actually has a Nashville connection. Apparently, in August of 1834, the Nashville Banner reported that a man named Nimrod Murphy claimed to have invented a perpetual motion machine. I don't know exactly what that would be, but it sounds like it would move on its own without anything needing to move it. The Mobile Advertiser picked up on this piece of news the following month, and it ridiculed Murphy, saying, "Probably Mr. Murphy has succeeded in handing himself over the Cumberland River, or a barnyard fence by the straps of his boots." To literally pick yourself up by your bootstraps is impossible. And that phrase was originally meant to refer to something absurd. So perhaps we were never meant to go it alone. Perhaps we were always meant to depend on one another. The writer of Ecclesiastes certainly understood this wisdom, and Ruth seems to understand it as well. Two are better than one. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Life isn't meant to be lived in isolation from others, and especially when life is hard, we should lean on one another. I think Ruth's faithful love for Naomi is so great, and she cares so much for her, that she can't imagine abandoning Naomi to a life of solitary hardship. If Naomi's life is full of complaining and bitterness, then at least she won't have to suffer alone. They are in this together, and they will journey together to Bethlehem. If you're familiar with this story, then you know that when they arrive in Bethlehem, Ruth meets Naomi's relative Boaz, and after a time, with the help of Naomi, Ruth and Boaz marry, and she gives birth to a son named Obed. Naomi becomes the baby's nurse, and in the end, the women of the neighborhood say to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him. Naomi's life is restored because of God's faithfulness. But scholars point out that God does not speak or act directly in the book of Ruth. Instead, God's faithfulness is reflected through human relationships, faithful human relationships. Naomi's life is restored through Ruth's faithful companionship, and Ruth's life is restored through Naomi's. According to scholar Kathleen O'Connor, in the ancient world, tribal and family origins firmly fixed one's identity and one's gods, and people did not voluntarily abdicate either. Yet when Ruth abandons her own people and her gods and pledges her loyalty to Naomi, she also pledges her loyalty to Naomi's God. She takes on a new identity, and she becomes faithful to the God of Israel, and that God is faithful to her. Ultimately, Ruth will become an important figure in Israel's family tree. Her son Obed will grow up to become the father of Jesse, who will become the father of David. And if you're familiar with the opening chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, you know that before Matthew recounts the birth of Jesus, he lists Jesus' genealogy. Ruth is listed there, one of a few women, along with Boaz and Obed. They are the ancestors of Joseph. Many years after Ruth and Naomi, God will once again act through the faithfulness of 2 people who journey together to the house of bread. This will be God's definitive way of showing us that we were never meant to go it alone, that we are in this together. Because God's faithful love for us is so very great, and God cares for us so much, that God will not abandon us to lives of solitary hardship. God will show up. God will become human. God will enter our world in the person of Jesus, our faithful companion born in the house of bread to restore our lives. And because this Jesus is with us, even in the midst of hardship, we too will show up for others. We will walk alongside those who struggle. We will walk with those whose lives are marked by complaint and bitterness. We will risk marginalization and outsider status for the sake of others, because we know that God's faithfulness is reflected in our human relationships, and no one is meant to go it alone. We are in this together. Thanks be to God. Amen.